Welcome to the CEC Report. It's the 22nd of May. I'm Robert Barwick and I'm joined today by CEC leader Craig Isherwood. Welcome, Craig.
Yeah, thanks, Robbie.
Craig, before we begin this week's CEC Report, I have a little bit of an announcement. Either this week or next week, but in case it's this week, the CEC report should be played on Channel 44 in Sydney, called TVS up there. Now, so that's a new development. It means we'll be on in five capital cities. So we're nationwide. So that's excellent. What's also good about it is it means Malcolm Turnbull will be able to watch the CEC report
that'd be good.
in his lounge room.
Yes.
Right, which is very good because that brings me to my next announcement. Malcolm Turnbull, of course, as we've pointed out in the past, he wants to shut down community television. He's announced that this is the last year of community television. So people will still be able to watch the CEC report on YouTube and our website, but this community television outlet's very important, not just for us, but for a lot of other people. And this is quite a travesty, really. It means that only commercial voices will be heard on free-to-air TV, right? So there's a big backlash against this by the fans of community TV. There's a week of action coming next week. If viewers are interested, go to Facebook and look up Commit to Community TV on Facebook, and you'll see the details there for the week of action that people can participate in, because it would be very good if we could reverse this decision.
Yes,
right?
very
This
good.
is the kind of information we put on here, we get to put out to the public, is very important, and other people feel likewise. So we must reverse that decision. Go check out the campaign. So that's the announcement. Let's start. In this week's CEC report, war disinformation exposed. And if it's a bubble, the banks are in trouble. So first, war disinformation exposed. And Craig, today we're going to expose disinformation related to war on two fronts. One is the, ISIS in Syria and what contributed to that. And the other one is Ukraine. And there's a third one we won't have time to go through, but people might have heard about it, which is the top investigative journalist Seymour Hersh has put out an alternative version of the killing of Osama bin Laden, which does relate to the ISIS story we're going to talk about, but it's caused a huge ruction in the United States and around the world, as it should have, of course, because what it does, it shows that, you know, most of what we're fed by our governments when it comes to war is propaganda and disinformation, right? And Seymour Hersh is a very well-respected, very experienced investigative journalist of good standing, and his report is quite damning. What we're going to talk about, though, is something that has had a little bit less publicity, but is, in one sense, more important, which is that a smoking gun has just surfaced showing how the Obama administration had put out intentional disinformation about the Benghazi terrorist attack on September 11, 2012. Right, this was when the US embassy was attacked in Benghazi in Libya, and 4 Americans, the ambassador and 3 others, were killed. And the disinformation was put out because it was a cover-up of multiple layers, right? And we'll go through what those are. Now, we can say this now because Freedom of Information requests have just obtained documents from the Defence Intelligence Agency, which is an intelligence agency attached to the Defence Department in the United States. And they show that the day after this attack, so on September 12, 2012, the day after this attack, the White House knew that the attack was committed by Al-Qaeda. Right, effectively Al-Qaeda, an organisation that calls itself something different but is affiliated with Al-Qaeda. They knew that. And that's a huge deal because that's not what the White House said. For weeks afterwards, the White House insisted that the attack was a spontaneous backlash to a video that had been made in America insulting the Prophet Muhammad. And viewers may remember that, right? And in Australia at the time, Craig, the same day we had demonstrations on the street here, right, against this video, right, and there were demonstrations all around the world, demonstrations in Cairo, and there was this event in Benghazi, and they said, oh, it's all part of the same thing. Now, what I want to do is play a clip. Now I have to apologise, it's from Fox News, which is the Murdoch channel in America, but the reason I'm using it is because it's the one that's put all these things together, where Susan Rice, who was the UN, Obama's ambassador to the UN, went on the Sunday talk shows on the 16th of September, so almost a week later, claiming repeatedly that the attack was perpetrated by people who had a spontaneous angry reaction to this video. So just have a quick look at that clip.
September 16th, U.S. Ambassador to the United Nations Susan Rice goes on 5 Sunday talk shows.
In fact, this was not a pre-planned, premeditated attack. That what happened initially was that it was a spontaneous reaction to what had just transpired in Cairo as a consequence of the video. And then as that unfolded, it seems to have been hijacked. What we think then transpired in Benghazi is that opportunistic extremist elements came to the consulate as this was unfolding. We believe that it looks like extremist elements, individuals joined in that effort with heavy weapons.
So Craig, it's quite clear there, she's crystal clear, right? This was the video, that's all it was. Obama had 2 motives for this lie. The first motive was the more obvious one, which was that he had based this was in the middle of an election, he'd based his whole re-election campaign on this chest-beating claim that he had killed Osama bin Laden and Al-Qaeda was on the run, right? And I'll just play a clip that shows that. This is from the Democratic presidential campaign launch a few weeks earlier. You can see Obama and John Kerry basically saying this.
September 5th and 6th, at their convention in Charlotte, Democrats touted a crippling of al-Qaeda.
Ask Osama bin Laden if he is better off now than he was 4 years ago.
Al-Qaeda is on the path to defeat and Osama bin Laden is dead.
Now, that part of it, that part of the cover-up is what his Republican opponents went after him for. And people might have heard about this. If viewers have heard about this, what they've probably heard is that the Republicans have been going after Obama about Benghazi, but it's, you know, over the top, right? And so a lot of lefties have come out defending Obama, saying, yeah, that's all rubbish. And of course, one of the reasons why is Republicans have no credibility on these issues themselves. No. They're the ones that came up with the lies about WMDs and got
it's the George Bush factor.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And also, Craig, they've kept it at that issue that this was something Obama had to do for his re-election campaign, because there's a more fundamental reason for the cover-up, which the Republicans haven't wanted to get into, because they're involved in this too. And the more fundamental reason for the cover-up is that the whole mess in Benghazi was related to the fact that the jihadists that did this attack, associated with Al-Qaeda, were the very people that Obama, the French, the British, the people who toppled Gaddafi in Libya had consciously used these jihadists to do it. We supported it. Kevin Rudd was running around Australia as the Prime Minister. He wanted to get involved, or the Foreign Minister at the time, he wanted to get involved in this. He wanted our SAS to go over there and help, work side by side with Al-Qaeda-linked jihadists to topple this regime. And then as soon as Libya was toppled, Gaddafi was toppled in Libya, they wanted these same jihadists to go north to Syria and do the same thing there and take the weapons that had been seized from the Libyan regime north, and they were taking those weapons into Syria. And that's the bigger issue here. That's what as many Republicans as Democrats were involved in, people like John McCain, they're all in favour of this, right? Because this was the American policy of regime change, but that's the part nobody has talked about. And in fact, Craig, the CIA annex that's attached to the Benghazi consulate was probably heavily involved in this gun running, right? That was all part of the mess. So they haven't touched on that, but the documents that have been revealed in this Freedom of Information request actually show that. So I want to go through, I'm going to read the documents, we'll put them on the screen, and people can see what they say. The first document is from September 12, 2012, the day after the attack. You'll see the subject line is Brigades of the captive Omar Abdul Rahman claim responsibility for attack on Benghazi, Libya. And it states, the attack on the American consulate in Benghazi was planned and executed by the brigades of the captive Omar Abdul Rahman. The BCOAR are connected to Ansar al-Sharia Katiba. The attack was planned 10 or more days prior on approximately 1 September 2012. The intention was to attack the consulate and to kill as many Americans as possible to seek revenge for US killing of al-Libi in Pakistan and in memorial of the 11 September 2001 attacks on the World Trade Center buildings. The leader of BCOAR is Abdul Basit Azuz. Azuz was sent by Zawahiri to set up al-Qaeda bases in Libya, end quote. So that's it. Al-Qaeda was behind this attack. They planned it 10 days earlier. It's revenge for a drone killing in Pakistan. It's got nothing to do with the video, right? So it exposes the lie there and that they knew it straight away. So that's the first document. The second document shows that Obama knew that arms shipments were being made from Benghazi to Syria from October 2011 until early September 2012, and he did nothing to stop them despite a UN arms embargo because, of course, they wanted the outcome. So this is what it says. This is from October 12, 2012, Department of Defense document. Quote, weapons from the former Libya military stockpiles were shipped from the port of Benghazi, Libya, to the port of Banias and the port of Borj Islam, Syria. The weapons shipped during late August 2012 were sniper rifles, RPGs, and 125mm and 155mm howitzer missiles. During the immediate aftermath of and following the uncertainty caused by the downfall of the Gaddafi regime in October 2011 and up until early September 2012, weapons from the former Libya military stockpiles located in Benghazi, Libya, were shipped from the port of Benghazi, Libya, to the ports of Banias and the port of Borj Islam, Syria. So they knew exactly what this operation was and what was happening. The third document, which I won't read through, we can put it on the screen while I'm talking though. The third document shows that Obama knew as of August 2012 that his policy would result in the establishment of a caliphate by ISIS in Syria and Iraq. And so it says August 12, 2012, quote, the Salafist, the Muslim Brotherhood and Al-Qaeda or AQI's Al-Qaeda in Iraq are the major forces behind the insurgency in Syria, which is an admission that the so-called Free Syrian Army and the opposition to Assad is Al-Qaeda. They knew that. We were being told the opposite.
And just to clear, Obama's working with Al-Qaeda.
Working with them.
People,
right.
Yeah,
that's right.
That's stunning.
Al-Qaeda in Iraq is familiar with Syria. AQI trained in Syria and then infiltrated into Iraq. AQI supported the Syrian opposition from the beginning. Opposition forces are trying to control the eastern areas adjacent to the western Iraqi provinces, Mosul and Anbar, in addition to neighbouring Turkish borders. Western countries, the Gulf states and Turkey are supporting these efforts. If the situation unravels, there is the possibility of establishing a declared or undeclared Salafist principality in eastern Syria, and this is exactly what the supporting powers to the opposition want, that is those countries named, in order to isolate the Syrian regime. In other words, they're saying they're going to set up a caliphate, and that's what the Western countries behind this, Turkey and the Gulf states like Saudi Arabia want. That's what a document says in 2012, that the ISIS, that state that's been declared now, is exactly what the people behind Assad, our side, wanted. Right? So this is very, very significant. Anyway, for the sake of time, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to just touch on another piece of disinformation. Welcome back to the CEC Report, where we're talking about war disinformation exposed. What we spoke about before the break, Craig, was how the Benghazi consulate attack in September 11, 2012 was lied about by the Obama administration to cover up the fact that it was the tip of the iceberg of an operation that they knew was using trained Al-Qaeda terrorists against, they were moving them north to fight to topple Assad in Syria, that would create ISIS. Right? It's proof that the people behind the attempt to overthrow Assad, the regime change in Syria, knew that ISIS would result. Right? So anyway, this is important. We want to, just briefly, let's talk about a second piece of disinformation though, because it was on Australian television. This relates to Ukraine, and it was a 60-minute story on Sunday night about the downing of MH17, where you had this, puffed up tabloid current affair journo, Michael Usher, driving around Ukraine with a British security guy guiding him, and a British security guy, Craig, almost definitely means an MI6 or MI5 agent, right? Well connected. This was propaganda where they proved what the Dutch investigators, who lost the most people in the crash and are the most motivated, haven't proven, right, and haven't claimed. They proved that Russia did it, and they, by implication, they did it deliberately.
It's a bit stunning, Robbie. You've got a young fellow there, effectively with a laptop, saying, I know more than all the combined intelligence agencies of Britain, Russia, the Dutch, and so forth.
Everybody.
Everyone. And they say, we come up with this conclusion.
And 60
Russia
Minutes.
did it, which is the intention in the first place.
Exactly. So we released a statement the next day saying, did MI6 script the 60 Minutes story on MH17? What was interesting, Craig, is at the same time, one of the top US investigative reporters, Robert Parry, the man who broke the story on Iran-Contra in the 80s, he also ripped into 60 Minutes for the same reasons we did, and it's on his website, which is called Consortium News, that, anyway, I'll just set it up. You'll see images on the screen. 60 Minutes attempted a sleight of hand trick at the end, because what they did is they went around and showed, they took web photos of various positions of these Buk missile launchers which brought down the plane, which are blamed for bringing down the plane. And they showed from the photos where they actually were in Russia, and when they get to that position, they'd show their image of the position, and they show the photo side by side, and you can see it's the same place. And then right at the very end of the show, they accuse Russia of lying, because Russia said, hang on, here's a Buk missile launcher with a missile missing that's just been used. It's a Ukrainian one, and here's where it was, right? And they say, no, Russia, where Russia's saying it was is a lie. It's actually in this position that's in the rebel-held territory. It's actually a Russian missile launcher. Here's the proof. Here's the picture of that shows the missile launcher with the missile missing. Here's the place where it is. Except when they got to that part, they didn't show a side-by-side shot because they couldn't, right? Because the two places do not look the same. They were just hoping the viewer would not notice that. And so Robert Parry wrote on his website called Consortium News, quote, this was the documentary slam dunk moment, the final proof that the Russians, and particular Vladimir Putin, were guilty in the deaths of 298 innocent people. But the scenes look nothing at all alike if you put them side by side. While 60 Minutes reporter Michael Usher is standing in an open field, the earlier video shows an overgrown area. Indeed, almost nothing looks the same. So, what you're seeing, Craig, just to comment on this piece of disinformation and the earlier thing we talked about before the break with ISIS, etc., and the question of Benghazi, doesn't all this, there's a purpose behind this disinformation. The Obama administration, our allies, the British, etc., they have a runaway agenda for war.
Well, Robbie, you have to look at this in the context. This is an attack against Russia, and particularly the one on Ukraine, right? The Ukraine issue and the MH17. It's to stop Russia. It's to, like we've said before in many of our pieces of literature, to contain Russia. Russia's never been contained in history, and this is an attack deliberately on Russia by the West. It's an extension of the idea of the encroachment of NATO onto Russia, and it's in the anniversary period of the MH17. But also, Robbie, behind the scenes, what you have to understand is that Russia is part of the BRICS groupings of countries. You know, Brazil, Russia, India, China, and South Africa. Now, we don't hear about this on our television screens. Most people are ignorant about what this means. But you have enormous developments taking place around this coalition of countries, around the issue of national sovereignty, of sovereign economic development, of new credit systems.
And a financial system that doesn't dictate to countries like the present British-American one does.
Like the IMF and the World Bank and so forth. So what you have is this is taking off like wildfire, and there's more and more countries wanting to get involved. Take the issue of Greece, for example. Greece has been invited to be the 6th sign-up for the new BRICS Development Bank. You know, people are thinking there's no way out for Greece. Well, there is, and it's through the BRICS countries. So what you're seeing is an attack on that process. It's much bigger than just disinformation about the war. It's actually about attacking an entire new emerging paradigm in order to destroy it.
They want strategic tension that can become a war if that's what it takes if necessary.
Yeah.
All right, let's take a break. When we come back, we're going to talk about the property bubble. Welcome back to the CEC Report. Finally, if it's a bubble, the banks are in trouble. So, Craig, this week, Greg Medcraft, who's the boss of ASIC, one of the financial regulators, Australian Securities and Investments Commission, he has finally acknowledged that there is a housing bubble in Australia, especially Sydney and Melbourne, which of course is pretty much like size-wise, that's most of the market. So he said, history shows that people don't know when they are in a bubble until it's over. I am quite worried about the Sydney and Melbourne property markets. He said the Reserve Bank's record low 2% interest rate, which he said, quote, everyone knows is not where rates are going to be long term. That rate is encouraging people to, quote, start borrowing when they can't afford it, after which, quote, what generally happens is rates start to rise, which affects your ability to pay, and rate rises can actually bust a bubble, so you end up with a double whammy. And then he said that such low rates are forcing people, quote, searching for yield into buying more complex products they don't understand, end quote. So, Craig, this is a welcome note of caution from ASIC, but it's long overdue.
He's
right?
he's just stating the horse is bolted, Robbie.
No, of course. And there's a release today that on our website people can see the details of this. But here's our overarching point. If you acknowledge that there's a housing bubble in Australia, you're also acknowledging that the entire national financial system is in deep trouble. How? To acknowledge there's a bubble means you're acknowledging that it can pop, because that's what bubbles do, they all pop, right? And the Australian housing bubble is more than 60% of the business, Craig, of each of the big four banks. When the bubble pops, those big four banks will crash with it, but those big four banks in turn control 80% of Australia's banking system. If they crash, the entire Australian banking system goes down with it. That's what, it's that acknowledgement of a bubble that stands between people understanding our financial system's in trouble or it's not. And for him to acknowledge that, that's actually what he's saying, although he didn't say it himself. We're pointing that out, right?
And this is exactly right now, Robbie, why we have to move to a Glass-Steagall re-regulation of the system.
Yep.
That bubble has to be stopped in its tracks. And how do you do that? You use the power of government. We've got 200 odd regulators sitting in Parliament up there in shiny suits. Yeah. They can have more power than the entire financial system.
And the Constitution says they have the power.
They have the power to regulate the banking system. It's been done during World War II, where the politicians, that statesman at that point, were saying, no, the banking system is not going to dictate to the internal economy of Australia. It can do the same thing. Bring in Glass-Steagall. What do? You separate out the commercial banking system. You protect the depositors, first and foremost, right? Then you say to the merchant banking and the investment banking side of things, well, you've got to separate out from your existing, too big to fail banks. Separate boards. Not this ring fencing idea where you have a bit of a break, but you have the same board over the top like they're have proposed in England.
Okay.
So the point is that you've got to do that. You can do it politically, and then two other things. You have to go with large-scale credit production for real production. Put people back to work. Build the railway.
Not speculating on property prices.
Get rid of that.
Stock markets or stuff.
And you might, and we're definitely going to have a housing moratorium, some sort of a debt moratorium. Freeze housing mortgages where they are at now, and then just stabilise the entire system. The government has enormous power to do this. Whether they choose to act now, preemptively, is going to be a matter to see in the next coming weeks and months. But if we don't, we're going to end up in chaos.
And Craig, his last point was an interesting one, because he says because interest rates are so low, investors are looking for higher returns, and they're the ones that are piling into the banks to buy investment properties that are keeping these prices up. Yeah. They're setting themselves up, well, as we used to say in the schoolyard, they're cruising for a bruising, right? And it's going to be a whopper. So anyway, that's now been stated. We forecast this. That's it for this week's CEC Report. Thanks for tuning in, and tune in next week for more.